Okay, guys, it's Mrs. Barrett again. I'm sorry we were so rudely interrupted last time. Now, remember, one of the things we're doing with these videos is trying to figure out where in the world is Mrs. Barrett. I'm going to give you a little view. Yeah. Little fountain over there. Let's jump in and get back to our story. Thad said, "Want to find him?" Across the way, Senor Rosales' restaurant, where Jacob often was, stood closed down for the night. Since the cafe had no door, I crossed over and peeked inside. Senor Rosales was asleep in his coffin. There was no sign of Jacob. "He'll be back," I said, feeling more annoyed than anything. Thad said, "Gotta go. My old man will be fretting." "I bet you're right. He'll show up in the morning." I didn't take that bet, but I gave Thad 2 fish. "Your share. And take the crabs. Jacob doesn't like them." Thad pushed his fingers through the salmon gills and hefted the basket. "Guess I need my lantern," he said. I hung it over his free fingers. "Sorry about that oar." "Nothing," he said, then stepped away through the mud. As he went, he lifted the fish and let their tails wave goodbye. "Got work tomorrow," he called. "Me too," I called back. "But we need to replace that oar. When I get some time, I'll come down to your store and get one." I watched him move uphill and soon disappear. I stood before the tent thinking about Jacob, where he might be. Downhill, I saw that Portsmouth Square, the center of the city, was yet abloom with lights, along with shouts of men and music, too. Since my brother had no affection for gambling or drinking, I was sure he had not gone to such places. Besides, at that late hour, I didn't think it was safe for me to go there alone. All this meant I had no idea, and let it be said, no great desire, to seek out Jacob. All the same, I kept wondering, where is he? Standing in the darkness, the chill wind rising, I turned back to the tent and stared into it. This was something that Jacob had never done before. Of course, I had to acknowledge I'd never come back so late either. I recalled that though I had told him where I was going that morning, he had been sleepy and might not have heard. A twinge of self-blame reminded me I had not made certain he'd heard me. Leaving the remaining fish by the entryway, I went into our tent. On hands and knees, I couldn't see a thing. I felt on the left side of the dirt floor for my sleeping space. When I found it, I untied my money belt from around my waist, checked to make sure I had my knife, and poked all under my bed. I lay down and drew Mother's shawl up to my chin. It being chilly, I was happy to be covered. As I listened to the wind fluffing our tent cloth, that's kind of like fluffing it up and down, I hoped that Jacob, wherever he might be, was warm. For a while, I thought about my day with Thad. I had so enjoyed it, not the least because I was free of clinging Jacob. That thought brought me to remember his idle chatter about seeking employment on a departing ship. Could he have done that? No, not in a million years. Then where is he? I told myself he was not a baby, and in all likelihood, I'd see him in the morning, grumbling as ever. I even told myself that he might well have chosen to be away from me, the tent, to vex me, to make me worry about him. So it was that I pushed aside my feelings of uneasiness and rolled over to my right sleeping side. A few moments later, rain began to splatter hard against the tent cloth. Its steady beat lulled me. As I began to drift off, Father's words came into my head. I'm depending on you to take care of the boy. Mother is depending on it. Is that clearly understood? My last waking thought was, nothing has happened to Jacob. Nothing. That comforting idea eased me into sleep. Chapter 18. In the morning, I lay abed, listening to the soft, steady patter of rain upon our tent. The sound reminded me that the weather was outside. I was within, dry and warm, a sweet and soothing feeling. I'd been so tired the night before that I'd fallen asleep in my clothing. A night of dancing followed by a day of hard rowing will cause fatigue. That led me to think, with more pleasure, about the day before. I recalled, too, that Mother must surely be coming soon, and Father was due in a few days. They would, I hoped, be proud of me for having managed myself and Jacob so well. All this put me in such good spirits that I called out a "Good morning" to Jacob, but received no reply. Belatedly, I remembered that when I returned late the night before, he was not in bed. I lay there, choosing to believe his absence was his way of showing resentment for my spending the day with Thad. Moments later, I told myself surely by this time he would have come back. I decided he was most likely with Senor Rosales. I also considered the possibility that he'd gone to Portsmouth Square to look for gold. The low angle of the sun, if there was sun, sparked lost grains. Mornings were the best time to look, since drunken men stumbled about late at night. If I found Jacob there, I knew he'd tease me. He was working when I slept. That reminded me, I'd promised Mr. Lyle, the carpenter, that I'd worked with him that day. I drew out my money belt from under my bed, checked for my money and knife, fastened it around my waist, and told myself that I needed to make sure Jacob was all right before I set off for work. I stuck my head out of our tent. It was still drizzling and too overcast to establish the time. Along the way, despite the inclement weather, the San Francisco Cafe restaurant was open for business, with a few customers waiting in line to be served. As always, Senor Rosales was at his stove, cooking, smoke rising up through his tin chimney. "Buenos dias, Senor Rosales," I called as I walked over. It was clear right away that Jacob was not there. I told the senor what happened to Thad and me, and that when I got back, Jacob was gone. "Have you seen him?" "Lo siento. Sorry to hear what happened, Corderita," said Senor Rosales. "All I can tell you is your hermano, your brother, was worried about you." "He's always worried," I said. "True, but this time, más. To tell you my thoughts, señorita, I think él se siento solo." He was feeling lonely, more than usual. "That is what I told your father. Not wise to leave him solo, alone." "I told Jacob he could come with us," I said, somewhat uncomfortable, aware that I had not truly encouraged him to come down the bay. "Can I give you some breakfast?" Senor Rosales offered me a piece of beef, which I quickly ate. "I have to go to work," I announced. "If you see Jacob, por favor, senor, tell him I'm working with Mr. Lyle. Ask him to come to me." "Absolutamente, Corderita." I stood before our tent, not sure what to do. Work or find Jacob? A younger brother who hampers one's life is most irritating. All the same, I felt I should locate him, tell him where I'd be, and that we should have dinner together. My way of absolving myself for slighting him the day before. I hurried over to Portsmouth Square, but he was not on the grounds. I eyed the gambling places. Whenever I passed by the entryways of Parker House and the El Dorado, I heard shouts, laughter, screams, and music. Often, horrid fights broke out among the men. Once, when passing a saloon, I heard pistol shots. Greatly frightened, I had watched as a dead man was borne away on an old door. Alas, such violence was common in this wild city. Though I much doubted Jacob had gone into either place, I told myself that if I was going to solve the aggravating puzzle of his whereabouts, I should make sure. I went into El Dorado. Unlike the night of the dance, gambling and drinking were already going on. I was bumped, shoved, and generally stomped on by a crowd of tough, loudmouth men and a few women. It didn't take long to determine that Jacob was not there, and then I did a quick check of the post office. He was not standing in the lines waiting for mail. I made a return trip to our tent in hopes he had come back. He had not, nor had Senor Rosales caught sight of him. It was about then that I began to truly worry. It was absolutely not like Jacob to stay away for so long. The rain had lessened and the morning fog had thinned, enough so that I could look down the bay and Rotten Row. I saw the ship that Jacob had pointed out, the Yankee Sword. She was still there. Remembering our last conversation, I wondered, could he have, in fact, signed on? No, I refused to consider such a possibility. Jacob would never do something that would be so unusual for him. Seeing that new ships had arrived, I considered that he might be on the Cove Beach, in hopes that Mother had arrived. That would be something he would do. Going downhill, I passed some frame houses being built on places which had been mud a couple of days ago. I even passed Mr. Lyle, the carpenter I'd promised to help. "Hey, Miss Torrey," he called. "You're late." "I need to find Jacob," I called back. "Have you seen him?" "Nope, but I could use him too." "Soon as I find him, I'll come," I said. I gave a wave and continued on. At the Cove Beach, lighters were hauling in throngs of newcomers and their baggage. Other boats were bringing men back from the diggings. The contrast was extreme. Newcomers, happy and excited. Returning miners, emaciated, filthy and dispirited, shivering with malarial fevers. I suddenly felt a twinge of Jacob's apprehension. What if Father did not return? What if he was ill, injured, had found no gold? All were real possibilities. There was no sign of Jacob among the onlookers at the cove, nor, for that matter, of Mother. I did remind myself that I had an obligation to replace the oar I had broken the day before. Then it also occurred to me that perhaps Jacob, in search of me while I was looking for him, might have gone to see Thad. I hurried over to the store where Thad clerked. The Howard and Mellis store sold all kinds of the dry goods that miners needed, from slouch hats to shoes, picks to pans, and the things that ships required. The store even posted ship arrivals and departures. As usual, it was crowded, and it was almost comical to watch the faces of newcomers when they were told the prices of the things they desired. $50 for a pickaxe, $40 for a pound of coffee. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that Tori and her family were so stunned by how expensive everything was in San Francisco. I found Thad at the back of the store, piling up canvas trousers. "Morning," he said when he saw me. "I put aside a new oar for that boat we used. $40, but I lost 25 at the tables this morning. I'll owe you. Jacob back?" I was annoyed by his betting, But being more concerned with Jacob, I only replied to his question, "Not yet." "You ask Senor Rosales?" "He said Jacob was looking for me. Thad, if he comes by, tell him I'll be working with Mr. Lyle, or to go back to the tent and wait." "Aya, he'll show up." He fetched the new oar, which I signed for and brought back to the cove, and left in the boat we had borrowed. Then I sat in the boat, dejected, growing ever more concerned. I tried to think where I might look for Jacob. I needed to find him to settle myself. Near the building where Thad worked was the Mercury Saloon. The Mercury was one of those ships that had been left in Rotten Row. Somebody had purchased her, hauled her hulk over the Yerna Buena Cove flats. With pilings made from her masts, she was fixed against the new central wharf and turned into a building, a gambling saloon. For San Francisco, that was not unusual. Right across the way was another ship, the Euphemia, still afloat. It was being turned into a new city jail. Other empty boats had become hotels, warehouses, and hospitals. One was becoming a church. As for the landlocked Mercury, her bow had been sawed off and squared. Over the entryway was a sloping roof where the name Mercury Saloon had been painted in huge letters. Imagine if there were so many ships around that you could just take a ship and turn it into a building. That's kind of crazy. And think about, I wonder why they didn't do that and make like apartments in a ship. Because remember, a lot of them were living in tents, just like Tori and Jacob. I don't know. I gotta think about that one. Let's keep going. Since the saloon was right on the cove shore, miners came directly from the diggings up bay and began to gamble with their newfound gold. Some won, most lost, and did so quickly. As a result, the place was always full of the frenzy of hope and desperation, as these men cast away what they had worked so hard to get. The Mercury fascinated many, including Thad. Jacob knew he liked going in. Hadn't Thad even gone this morning? Jacob also knew I had been there any number of times trying to get Thaddeus to leave. It occurred to me that perhaps Jacob went to the Mercury to look for us, and someone had seen him. But with the Mercury's reputation for being one of the worst saloons, you may be sure I liked it no more than the places on Portsmouth Square. I was reluctant to go inside. "Stop making excuses, Tori," I told myself. "You need to find Jacob." I went in. That's where we're going to leave off for today. I'm going to give you one more look at where I am. Ooh, I wish you could really see the top of the building. There's a really cool dome on the top of this building. Let's see if you figure out where I am. Bye guys, I'll chat with you later and we'll be back for chapter 19.